Maylin sat by the small window of her apartment, watching the rain slide down the glass. The sound of it reminded her of home, her old home in Fujian, China, where she used to listen to the rain with her husband beside her. But this was different. There was no one sitting next to her now. The room was quiet, too quiet. Her husband, Jun, had been gone for almost a year. He was a kind man, a hard worker, who always carried the smell of factory oil on his clothes. They came to California together with hope in their hearts and only a few $100s in their pockets. Jun had promised her that life here would be better, and for a while it was. They worked long hours, shared small dreams, and laughed about how strange everything in America felt at first. The food, the language, the fast life. But one morning, Maylin's phone rang and everything changed. It was a call from the factory. There had been an accident. Jun had been caught in a machine. He didn't survive. She remembered dropping the phone, her knees giving way beneath her, the world spinning until everything went black. In the days that followed, she went through life like a shadow. People came, brought food, offered words, and then left. After the funeral, the visitors stopped coming. The laughter that once filled their small apartment disappeared. Only silence stayed. Maylin tried to keep herself busy. She found a job folding clothes in a laundromat. It wasn't much, but it kept her hands moving and her mind a little quiet. Every morning she took the same bus, passed the same gray buildings, and tried not to think too much. She lived above a convenience store owned by a kind old couple who let her rent a small room. It was just enough for one person. A bed, a table, a small window, and the sound of traffic below. Sometimes at night she would open the window and talk softly to the stars. She would tell Jun about her day, how she fixed the broken washing machine or how the boss's cat knocked over a basket of clean towels. She would whisper, "I miss you," and imagine that maybe he could hear her somehow. But as time went on, people around her started to move forward. Her co-workers talked about weddings, new babies, and family visits. Maylin would smile and nod, but deep down she felt she didn't belong anywhere anymore. She was still young enough to start over, but in her heart she felt too old to dream again. One Sunday, her friend Mrs. Chen invited her to the Chinese temple in town. "It will be good for you," Mrs. Chen said. "You need to be around people again." Maylin hesitated. She hadn't gone out much since the funeral, but she didn't want to seem rude, so she agreed. At the temple, there were lanterns hanging everywhere and the smell of incense filled the air. People laughed and shared food. Maylin stood quietly by the side, watching the families together. Parents holding children, couples bowing together before the statue of Buddha. She suddenly felt very small, like an invisible person standing among the living. During lunch, a group of older women began talking nearby. One of them, without meaning to be cruel, said, "Ah, poor Maylin, such a young widow. But at her age, it's not easy. No man wants a widow. Bad luck, you know." The women laughed softly, not realizing she had heard them. Maylin kept her face calm, but her hands shook. The words hit her heart like a knife. That night, when she came home, she couldn't hold it in anymore. She sat on her bed, covered her face, and cried. "No man wants me," she whispered. The words felt heavy in her mouth. It wasn't just about men or marriage. It was about being unwanted, about feeling like she no longer had a place in the world. The next morning, she washed her face, tied her hair back, and went to work like nothing had happened. She smiled when people spoke to her, even when her eyes still looked tired. Life went on, whether she was ready or not. Every day at the laundromat was the same. The smell of detergent, the sound of machines turning, the rhythm of folding. Sometimes she found comfort in the routine. Other times she felt trapped inside it. One afternoon, an elderly customer named Mr. Delgado came in. He owned a small ranch outside the city. He often brought his dusty clothes to be cleaned after long days of work. He didn't talk much, but he always thanked Maylin politely and left a small tip. One day he told her, "My friend has a farm near Pine Valley. He needs someone to help with bookkeeping, someone honest and careful. You seem like that kind of person." Maylin smiled shyly but said, "I don't know much about farms." Mr. Delgado chuckled. "You'll learn. I'll give him your number." She didn't think much of it, but a week later she received a call. The man's voice on the other end was deep and calm. "This is Thomas Braddock," he said. "I hear you're good with numbers. I could use a hand." At first, she wasn't sure if she should go. She didn't know him, and the idea of going to a ranch far from the city scared her. But something in his voice sounded kind, not demanding or impatient, just simple and honest. After thinking it over for a few days, she decided to give it a try. Before her first visit, she stood in front of the mirror, trying to decide what to wear. It had been years since she cared about how she looked. She chose a plain blue blouse and tied her hair neatly. As she looked at herself, she saw not the same woman she was when she first arrived in America, but someone older, quieter, and braver in her own way. The ranch was about an hour's drive from town. The road wound through green hills and open fields. When she arrived, she saw wide fences, cattle grazing, and a white farmhouse surrounded by tall trees. The air smelled of hay and sunlight. Thomas Braddock came out to greet her. He was tall, with a weathered face and kind eyes that carried both strength and sadness. He shook her hand gently and said, "Thank you for coming all the way out here." That day she helped him organize his papers and checklists. He was patient and soft-spoken. When she didn't understand a word, he would draw pictures or show her instead of getting frustrated. She noticed how quiet the ranch was. No city noise, no machines, just wind and birds and the sound of cows far away. When she left, he walked her to her car and said, "You're welcome here any time, Miss Lynn." She nodded, unsure of what to say. As she drove home, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something small and warm, like a light turning back on after a long night. That night, she looked out her window again. The rain had stopped. The stars were clear, scattered across the sky. She didn't talk to Jun this time. Instead, she whispered softly, maybe someone still sees me." And for the first time in many months, she fell asleep without tears on her pillow. She didn't know it yet. But that simple visit to the ranch would change everything. The loneliness, the fear, the feeling of being unwanted. Her heart, which she thought was buried with her past, was slowly learning how to beat again. Maylene began visiting the ranch once a week to help Thomas Braddock with his records. What started as a small favor soon became something she looked forward to. The ranch was peaceful. Wide open land under a big blue sky far from the noise of the city. She liked the smell of fresh grass and the quiet sound of the wind moving through the fields. Thomas was always kind to her. He never asked too many questions about her past, and he never made her feel small for not understanding something. He spoke slowly, smiled often, and treated her with respect. Sometimes he brought her a cup of coffee, even though she didn't like the taste much. She would laugh softly and say, "Too bitter," and he would reply, "That's because it's cowboy coffee." Over time, they started talking more, about small things at first. He told her stories about the ranch, about how his father had built it when he was a boy, about the tough winters and the long summers. She told him about China, about the rivers near her village and the smell of dumplings during the New Year. Their words were sometimes broken, but their smiles filled the gaps. One afternoon, while she was sorting papers, Thomas came in holding a basket. "Brought you something," he said. Inside were a few apples from his orchard. "These are from my best tree," he added proudly. She smiled, biting into one. "Sweet," she said, and he laughed, happy that she liked it. From then on, he often brought her small gifts: fresh eggs, wildflowers, homemade jam. Nothing expensive, but everything full of thought. As weeks turned into months, Maylin found herself feeling lighter. She still missed her husband, but the sadness wasn't as heavy anymore. When she came home from the ranch, she often found herself humming quietly. Even her coworkers noticed. "You seem happy these days," Mrs. Chen said with a teasing smile. Maylin just shook her head, trying to hide her blush. One Saturday, Thomas asked if she'd like to stay for dinner after work. "I make a decent stew," he said. She hesitated for a moment, but agreed. They ate together in his kitchen, a simple meal but warm and filling. They talked about the stars outside, about how big the sky felt compared to the crowded cities they both used to live in. After dinner, she helped wash the dishes. When she turned to thank him for the meal, he said softly, "You don't have to thank me, Maylin. It's good to have company again." She looked at him, at his gentle eyes and the lines on his face that told stories of hard work and quiet years, and something in her heart stirred. It wasn't sudden or loud. It was like the soft opening of a flower after winter. After that night, she visited more often. Sometimes she brought food from her own kitchen, stir-fried vegetables, soup, or dumplings that reminded her of home. Thomas would taste them with delight, sometimes struggling with chopsticks but trying anyway. They laughed together often. One day he asked if she'd like to learn to ride a horse. She had never been on one before. "Don't worry," he said. "I'll teach you." At first she was nervous, but as the horse began to move slowly under her, she felt a thrill. The wind in her face, the smell of dust and grass. Thomas walking beside her, smiling proudly. "See?" he said. "You're a natural." She laughed for the first time in years, a real laugh, one that came from deep inside. Over time, their friendship deepened into something neither of them expected. They spent evenings sitting on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky orange and gold. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they just sat quietly, comfortable in each other's presence. One evening, as they watched the light fade, Thomas said quietly, "You know, after my wife passed, I thought I'd be alone forever." Maylin looked at him. "I thought the same," she admitted softly. He nodded. "But maybe life has its own plans." Their eyes met, and for a long moment they didn't need words. Still, Maylin was afraid. She thought about what people might say. A Chinese widow and an American rancher. It wasn't something you saw every day. She worried his friends or neighbors might judge her, or that she might never fully belong in his world. One evening she tried to tell him. "People will talk," she said, looking down at her hands. Thomas smiled gently. "Let them talk," he said. "They don't live our lives. We do." That simple answer stayed in her heart. It gave her courage. A few weeks later, Thomas invited her to a local fair. They walked among the stalls, tasted homemade pies, and watched children laugh and run around. At one point, a woman selling flowers looked at them and said, "You two make a lovely couple." Maylin blushed deeply. But Thomas only smiled and said, "Thank you, ma'am." That night, on the drive back to the ranch, Maylin felt her heart full. The stars above seemed brighter, and the air smelled like hay and happiness. Months later, on a quiet Sunday morning, Thomas came to her door holding a small box. He looked a little nervous, his hat in his hands. "Maylin," he said softly, "you've brought peace back into my life. I didn't think I'd ever feel that again." He opened the box, revealing a simple gold ring. "I don't have fancy words, but I'd be proud if you'd be my wife." For a moment, she couldn't speak. Tears filled her eyes, but this time they were happy ones. She placed her hand over his and said, "I thought no man would ever want me again." Thomas smiled. "Then I guess I'm not just any man." They married a few months later in a small ceremony behind the ranch house. The sky was clear, and the fields were full of blooming wildflowers. There were only a few guests, Mr. Delgado, Mrs. Chen, and some close neighbors, but it felt perfect. Maylin wore a simple white dress. As she walked down the small path between the flowers, she felt her heart beating fast, not from fear but from joy. When Thomas took her hand and said, "I give you my name and my life," she looked into his eyes and saw everything she had once lost. Kindness, safety, love, all returned to her in one moment. After the ceremony, they had a small meal outdoors. There was laughter, music, and stories shared under the open sky. Maylin made dumplings for everyone, and Thomas made his famous apple pie. When the sun began to set, he led her out to the porch where they watched the light fade just like they always did. "You're home now," he said quietly. She nodded, her eyes shining. "Yes," she whispered, "I'm home." From that day on, Maylin became a part of the ranch. She helped with the animals, cooked meals for the workers, and filled the house with warmth. The walls that had once felt empty now echoed with laughter and the smell of home-cooked food. People in the nearby town soon grew to love her too. They would stop by for her dumplings or just to say hello. The woman who once cried alone in a small apartment was now surrounded by life, love, and purpose. Sometimes, when the nights were quiet, Maylin still thought of Jun. She would look up at the stars and whisper a soft thank you, not because she had forgotten him, but because he had been part of the journey that led her here. And when she turned to see Thomas asleep beside her, she smiled. The woman who once believed she was unwanted had found a place where she truly belonged. She was no longer just a widow from a faraway land. She was Maylin Braddock, the heart of a home, the soul of a ranch, and the proof that love can bloom again, even after the longest winter.